Welcome to Books in the Freezer, a podcast dedicated to the deliciously disturbing world of horror fiction. I'm your host, Stephanie, and today I am joined by author Angela Sylvaine to talk about Lost Girls in Horror and her collection, The Dead Spot Stories of Lost Girls. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
So excited to have you on and excited about this topic. This was one I know you and I both had a lot of fun, like deciding what our picks were going to be and what we were going to talk about. And we have even more than our picks, which is always exciting.
Yes, that's right. I mean, it turns out tragic girls are very much a major part of horror movies and horror books. So it's hard to choose.
Yeah. Let's talk about that right up front. Like for this episode, how are we defining Lost Girls and Lost Girl stories?
I think there's a lot of ways you could define it, but I guess in my mind, it's girls and women that seem kind of doomed from the start. Like you just
Mhm.
know in your gut, you're like, oh no, this is not going to go well for them. But they just fight so hard and they're so earnest, and you just really root for them. So I guess that's in my mind. It's these girls that you know things aren't going to go well for them, but you're just rooting for them to make it. And it doesn't always happen.
Yeah. And we came up with a ton. I always kind of, and I interpreted it for some of these as kind of like characters, like when we're introduced to them, like they are stuck,
Yes, totally.
like in their because of circumstance,
Mhm.
because of trauma, because of setting, like whatever reason, like something is keeping them like stagnant or like
Yes.
stuck in life.
Yeah, totally. I think that fits exactly. They're like they don't have direction. They feel
Hmm.
they feel lost personally and like they don't know where they belong. Absolutely. I think that fits.
Well, this is in conjunction with your upcoming short story collection. So tell us about the Dead Spot Stories of Lost Girls.
Yeah, so this is my debut short story collection coming out from Dark Matter Inc., which I'm very excited about. And it's a collection of 17 stories of women and girls battling monsters, ghosts, obsession, manipulation, just lost for a variety of reasons. It's definitely a dark collection, but one where you will want to root for those women and girls. So yeah, dark but kind of sweet
Yeah.
is kind of what I'm going for.
It it was a big variety in those stories. I really liked well, the opening story I feel like opens with a bang. Sorry if I'm not remembering the story
No, that's
titles.
okay. I think it's the opening story is Astronaut Dreams.
That's what it was. I'm like, it's astronaut something.
Yes.
I really liked that. I liked the wedding dress one, and I liked Sorry We're Open.
Yeah, that
Punched
one
me in
is
the
very
gut.
sad. Yes, yes. I like to I think what I've been told is I definitely write character horror, you know? So I
Mhm.
try to really make you fall in love with those women and girls, and then, you know, terrible things happen, so you feel very sad.
That's what makes the best horror, when you have emotional stakes in the
Yes.
story, because then that gut punches, you know?
Yeah. 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 So I'm glad that it did that to you. Great. Like, I'm sorry and you're welcome.
Oh, man, so what stories have you heard back from readers that they've connected with?
Astronaut Dreams is definitely a big one, which you know is kind of like eco horror. So
Yeah.
features this little girl who wants to be an astronaut, and she has her own little hazmat suit. Her dad has sort of duct tape for her to make her look like an astronaut, and some stuff starts happening with the bees, and she is really kind of uh, a victim of this whole eco horror thing that affects her family and her whole world. So it's this little girl just trying to make the best of it in a pretty bad situation. That one definitely resonates with people. And then I think the other one I probably hear the most about is The Return of the Wilderness Girls, which is a story about basically a troop of wilderness girls, which are kind of like the Girl Scouts, that go camping in the woods and they disappear without a trace, and the only one that comes out alive is their troop leader, the woman who's their troop leader. No one knows what happened to them. They search and search. And then years later, at every full moon, one of them comes wandering out of the woods, but they're changed. There's something wrong with them, and they're different. and eerie, and they only want to be around each other. They don't really have any interest in their friends and family anymore, and there's something kind of fundamentally off about them. So that's another one that people really seem to like.
Also, looking at the back and looking at the dates of when these stories were published and submitted, it seems like this is something you've been interested in writing about for quite a while. Why is that?
Yeah, when I started to put the collection together, it wasn't that I thought of the idea and then thought of stories to go with it. It was more like I looked at my catalog of stories, both ones that had been published and ones that hadn't been, and there was kind of a running theme there, which is just these lost girls, right? That are kind of lost in the world and victims of circumstance. And I think probably why that appeals to me is just because I am a woman in the world, you know? It's hard to be a woman in the world and not understand that we sometimes kind of get a lot thrown at us, and we don't always get to choose, what our lives are like. And sometimes our agency is taken away and our decisions are taken away. And um, I think that's like reality. So probably that's where it comes from, is kind of funneling its way into my fiction. And I know for myself, like, just my upbringing, I'm very much a I'm from North Dakota, and so I'm very Midwestern nice, and was raised to always smile and never say when things are going wrong or things are bad. You just always act like everything is totally fine, right? And that's the
Hmm.
expectation that's on you. So maybe there's a little bit of that too. It's like working my way through some of those emotions about
Yeah.
having to be that way. And I think a lot of women feel that way, right? You look prettier when you smile, and you should probably smile all the time and just act like everything's fine. So yeah, probably all those things sort of come out in the fiction as a way for me to kind of deal with our whole situation in the world, and but make it a little more something you can fight, right? Like monsters and fake horrors are a little easier to fight sometimes than that stuff in the real world. So
Yeah, that is true. I do remember a few years ago when there was the big rise in true crime, and I think we were having the conversation about how women are brought up to always be polite. And it was, I think, a big time in culture where people were saying, like, no, if it's your safety, like, screw politeness. If someone's creeping you
yes,
out, you don't need to worry about their feelings when it's their feelings over your safety.
for sure. And that's for me been a personal battle. Like, I've really had to rewire some things in my brain to change that way of thinking. And I think we probably are a fan of a horror podcast that says a version of screw politeness. Um, I have had to kind of internalize that. I even think about, I was traveling for work this past week, and I was at the airport, and I came out to my car in the parking garage, and there was a car pulled up, like right where you would walk out. And a
Ooh.
guy leaned out the door and said, "Can I follow you to your car?"
What?
And I
Wait,
was
what?
like, "No, absolutely not." Like, I just said it. And then I realized, I think what he was asking me was, can he have my parking space?
Oh.
Because it
I
was
was about to say, like,
a
what could
garage.
he possibly be
Right.
angling?
But I was actually thinking about that interaction, and I was like, "Hey, bro, not a good way to handle that situation. That was very
Oh.
ill advised." And secondly, I was sort of proud of myself because there would have been a time where I would have maybe been more polite about it.
I'm like, what do you mean by that exactly?
Right? I'm sorry. But I just abruptly was like, absolutely not. Get away from me.
Yeah, no.
So I was like, oh, good. Maybe I'm making some progress on this whole politeness thing and feeling like I just have to be nice all the time. Yay.
It sounds like it. It's a big step.
It's only taken me, several decades.
It's not an easy thing to unlearn overnight.
No, it's not.
No, God. I mean, growing up in, like, my last 2 years of high school, I went to, like, a fundy Christian high school, and I had to take, like, etiquette classes.
Yikes.
Like, yeah. All those important things, like how to get in and out of a car in a skirt and, like, walk up and down stairs and pass plates around at a dinner party.
Right. The
Ugh.
things you really need to know to be successful in life.
Ay, ay, ay.
Well, I'm glad we're both shaking off the shackles of all that indoctrination.
Oh, that we are. And you know what? Horror has helped with that.
For sure. Yes. That's the good thing about horror, you know? I think it points some of those things out to us that we don't always see. And you're like, wait a minute, I see what you did there. Okay, this is making me think about some things.
Well, should we talk about some Lost Girls in horror movies?
Let's do it.
I know this is a classic book, but when you brought up the theme, the first character that came to mind was Eleanor from The Haunting of Hill House, or the
Yes.
Haunting movie. I just think she is that character, and that she fits both of our definitions. And I mean, not that our definitions are different, but like both aspects of it. That when we meet her, she's in a stagnant place in her life, and she had like been her mother's caretaker for all this time, and then this opportunity comes up, and you just know, like, you just get a feeling things aren't going to go well for
Absolutely.
Eleanor.
I agree. From the beginning, you're like, oh no, poor Eleanor. Yeah. And how it all plays out too is just like so heartbreaking. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good one. That's a good one.
I was also thinking of May.
Yes. I actually have not seen that one, and it's been on my list forever. I need to watch it
Okay.
immediately.
Yes, she's just introduced as this very, like, lonely girl. Like, she's a little off. She's socially awkward. She has like a hard time meeting friends, and I was gonna say meeting people and making friends. Like, she has like weird
Mhm.
interests, and like in the movie you kind of like think things are going a certain way for her, and you'll have to watch it. You'll have to get back
I'm
to
gonna watch it.
me once you watch it.
Even just the cover, like I can picture it in my mind. It is so appealing. I'm gonna totally watch it soon. The other one I was thinking about was She Dies Tomorrow. That's one I watched recently. That's kind of newer. And it has to do with this idea of it's almost kind of like a thought virus
Hmm.
where someone says, I'm going to die tomorrow. I'm going to die tomorrow. I just know it. I'm going to die tomorrow. And as soon as they say it out loud, the person they say it to now also is infected.
Oh,
And they're like, I'm going to die tomorrow. And they're just fully convinced. I won't reveal the ending to you, but it's very quiet and surreal
yeah.
and follows the kind of path of this thought that just is like, well, you're doomed. You're dying tomorrow.
That's a
Nothing
very
you can do about it.
interesting premise.
Yeah. I like the idea of a thought virus. That's always appealed to me.
As I was thinking of this, I also thought, I know it's not a horror show, but the character of Ruth from Ozark, like
Yeah.
the Netflix series, I'm like, yeah, she is this
Good one.
character.
Yeah.
And you are rooting for her so much.
I know. I think that's great too when there's individual characters like that in shows. They don't necessarily have to be horror, right?
Mhm.
Who you're like, oh no, this poor woman, this poor girl. I just want them to make it.
Well, and with her, it's like things weren't looking well before the Bird family came into her life. Like, she also wasn't dealt a great hand.
Yeah.
But then them coming into her life just screwed her up in a totally different way and got her involved in, like, a whole other mess of things.
Yeah. That's the thing about these lost girls, right? They can't catch a break.
No.
The breaks are usually bad. The other one I was thinking about was, and this is an interesting one because she is sort of the main character, but also not a character, is the autopsy of Jane Doe.
Interesting, yeah.
Because, she is just a dead body
Mhm.
in that movie, but it's really all about her. And I think when you find out kind of what happened to her, she is sort of a lost girl in this situation, and they're discovering it to the father and son autopsy team. That one's a good one. It's very sad, I thought,
It's really sad.
and scary.
Yeah. It's really claustrophobic.
Yes. Yeah.
I was also thinking of Jennifer from Jennifer's Body, like, kind of
Absolutely.
stuck in this nowhere town,
Mhm.
and then the fate that befalls her, like, right at the beginning of the movie that, dooms her.
Yeah. It's one of my all-time favorite movies. Like, I would put that in my top 5 movies, and I think you're absolutely right. Like, poor her. and even Needy too,
Yeah.
you know? She's
Well, I
kind of
guess, yeah,
lost.
we open up with where she ends up, so yeah.
Yeah, like, she's nothing she can do to help her friend, and she gets drawn into this whole mess too, and it destroys them both, essentially. Although there is a little more of a, vengeful ending to that movie, which is
Yeah.
nice, but not without plenty of casualties, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think if the whole ordeal with Jennifer wouldn't have happened, it kind of seemed like Needy was a character that was going to have opportunities outside of their small town. Like she was
Sure.
painted as like a bright student, and it kind of seemed even within their friendship that Jennifer knew that
Yeah.
and was jealous of that.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
That's what I think was so interesting about that movie is it was such a close friendship, but there was toxicity there too
Mhm.
of not healthy,
Yeah.
jealousy and wanting the other person to take what the other person has. Yeah, but also like true love between
Yeah.
the two as well. Their relationship is great. What about Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me?
I haven't seen it. So
It's
please fill me in. I've watched the first 2
like
seasons of the show.
so Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me essentially covers what actually happens to Laura Palmer. So it's
Okay.
the actual events of her death. So watching the series, you sort of know what happened, but this actually shows you it's far darker than the series, I would say.
Really? Okay.
It's very disturbing. There are some extremely disturbing scenes in that movie. But it is just perfectly captures the lost girl theme, if nothing else in the series too. It's all about who who killed Laura Palmer. So she's dead
Yeah.
from square one. Um and that it's pretty awful the way she was found. And as they're looking into what happened to her, you just discover she had a really rough life, even though everything looked really nice on the surface. She was beautiful and popular and
Mhm.
all of those things. So I think she definitely fits the definition of a lost girl.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very disturbing though. I would be ready if you're going to watch that one. I will recommend, but with warnings.
Okay. Good to know. I am blinking on the protagonist's name, but in Gillian Flynn's Dark Places, where you're dealing with the protagonist who was the sole survivor, where their whole family was murdered, and it's like years later, and she's just stuck in life.
Yeah. And how wouldn't you be? You know?
Mhm.
That's like a I don't know, how would you not just be permanently traumatized by that kind of experience, right?
Mhm. She's such an interesting character. She's so in denial, and she had kind of been living on essentially charity that she got from the publicity of the event.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's an interesting one too is just that thought of kind of capitalizing on your trauma,
Mhm.
which I don't blame people for, but also it's weird, right? It's kind of
Mhm.
yeah, it's a hard one to know how to feel about.
It's getting the Sharp Objects treatment like it's getting an HBO miniseries 'cause of
I heard that.
so I'm very excited to see how they do that. I wasn't a huge fan of the Charlize Theron
Yeah,
movie. I found it a little bit underwhelming, so I'm hoping it gets revamped with this.
yeah, yeah. And I think Gillian Flynn, or is it Gillian? Gillian
I
or
think it's
Gillian?
Gillian, but
Gillian Flynn. Sometimes is kind of hard for me because the characters are so flawed. It can be sort of hard to find someone to root for, you know?
I love flawed characters, flawed protagonists, like weird protagonists that have like a flawed logic or like
Yep.
a cynicism
Yeah, yeah.
are like my favorite.
And I do sometimes, but there are sometimes I just can't find anything to
Yeah, I
latch on
get that.
to? It's like, give me
Yeah.
just a little something to root for them.
I mean, I think that the opening line in Dark Places is something like, "I have a meanness inside of me, and if you cut me open, it'll slither right out."
Ooh,
Like, that is
that's
just
powerful. There you go. That's what you're getting.
Yeah. Well, did you have any more?
The only other one that I thought of was It Follows,
Okay.
which is a very good movie. I mean,
Mhm.
so creepy. Talk about an amazing opening where you know you're in for it. But that one, I mean, literally, it follows, right? So, you have this nameless, hungry evil that just latches onto you and follows until you pass it to someone else. And so, even if you're free, you're kind of not because you did that to someone else now, which I
Yeah.
think is an interesting idea. Like, what's the definition of free in that scenario?
You have to live with that.
Yeah, you have to live with that guilt that you gave that to someone else.
This episode is brought to you by Fangoria, the world's best horror and cult film magazine since 1979. Listeners can use code BOOKSINTHEFreezer to get 20% off their order. That includes, of course, merchandise and first time subscriptions and single issues of the magazine. Not only are there tons of articles and interviews about upcoming horror movies, there's a regular segment by Stephen Graham Jones all about slashers called Slasher Nation, so you're going to want a copy. So again, that is code Books in the Freezer, and thank you, Fangoria, for supporting the show.
Are we ready to talk about some books?
I'm ready.
Okay. I'll start off with a book that came to mind right away. I read it last year. It is Deliver Me by L. Nash. We are following Dee Dee, who works at a meat packing facility in the Missouri Ozarks. She lives with her boyfriend, Daddy, who collects bugs. And I will let you know the boyfriend being named Daddy is something you should know because I had to reread paragraphs like 3 times. Like, wait, what? To finally understand, like, oh, this is her boyfriend. She calls him Daddy.
Interesting. That's got a
Yes.
whole vibe too.
Yes. This is a whole thing. But the character of Dee Dee has suffered several miscarriages and finds herself pregnant again. And she's determined to carry this one to term. You find out that she fled the Pentecostal church years ago, but she finds herself still dodging judgmental calls from her mother, asking her when she's like going back to church. And, she's telling her about this pregnancy. And right around this time, a friend from her past reemerges back in her life. And this is the charismatic Sloane who begins to feed her insecurities and fuel her desires. And then she announces her own pregnancy.
Oh, shady.
Yeah, it is. This is a dark story for a number of reasons. Dee Dee is an extremely complicated protagonist, and you are in her POV and you see her flawed way of looking at the world, and in a lot of ways it's naive, in a lot of ways it's cynical just because of the type of life that she's lived and experiences she's had. And she's definitely a lost girl as a product of her upbringing and where she lives, and adding in religious trauma on top of that. But yeah, this is a disturbing read exploring religious trauma, complicated friendships, mother daughter dynamics, and pregnancy.
Hmm.
So,
I'm definitely, I love a religious trauma. Like, give it to me. Yes. It's so disturbing and real life. And yeah, I, I, I want it. Yeah. I haven't actually read this one either. So,
I recommend it. It was one of my I think it was I think Rachel and I had this both as a favorite last year. This was a standout read for us. I between putting this in the fridge and freezer, but it's up there.
yeah.
But
So you're going,
if you like weird girl POV like I do, this is a
yeah,
must.
I'm into that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
So that is Deliver Me by L. Nash.
Okay. My first pick is a little bit of a left turn from Deliver Me because it's very whimsical. It's Pretty Little Dead Girls, a novel of murder and whimsy by Mercedes Yardley. And this was the first thing I ever read by Mercedes Yardley, and it just made me fall in love with her as an author. It's so gorgeously written. It's, very much like fairy tale style, where it hides dark things in beautiful words. And once you start delving into them, you're like, oh no, this is bad. This is not beautiful. It's very bad. So it's about Bryony Adams is the main character, and she is basically destined to be murdered. Everyone knows this about her. As soon as they look at her, they're like, that girl is destined to be murdered. Like, yikes.
Wow.
um, but the description says, fortunately, fate has terrible marksmanship. So she's trying to survive,
Mhm.
and she's kind of running and hiding and moving as fast as she can from one place to the next in this effort to outrun fate and her destiny to be murdered. And she ends up arriving in Seattle and meeting a variety of people. She meets a tortured musician and a market fish thrower and a starry eyed hero who is secretly actually a serial killer who feels like it's kind of his destiny to be the one who kills Bryony, who basically like fulfills her fate. So it's just, so it's like couched in cuteness,
Mhm.
but it's so dark.
Yeah.
The first line, and when I knew I was going to love this book, just says, Bryony Adams was the type of girl who got murdered.
Wow.
That's like literally the first line. I'm like, oh my God, this poor girl.
Yeah.
I don't even know anything about her yet. And I am in. Like, I'm rooting for her. She can't get murdered. Please don't do
No.
it. So yeah, I think it's kind of the epitome of lost girl. She knows she is destined for death, and is just trying to do everything she can to live her life and escape. So, highly recommend it. It's really beautiful. It's not gory or anything like that. So, I would put it at my rating would be room temp on that one.
That sounds good. That's been on my list for a while. I've heard really good things.
It's a quick read too.
Hmm.
So, if you're looking to like sneak in a quick book, that's a good one.
Okay. Well, taking a turn and talking about an older protagonist, I thought we should talk about Mary, An Awakening of Terror by Nat Cassidy.
Love it.
We see Mary. She is a quiet middle aged woman. She is going through perimenopause. When we meet her at the beginning of the novel, she is living in New York and she gets fired from her book selling job and moves to Arizona to be with her ailing aunt. And a lot of things start happening. I mean, she, first of all, is going through these physical changes that are uncomfortable, but she also can't look in a mirror without passing out. She has voices in her head telling her to do things. She's losing time. And this was such a good book.
I loved it. Like, it's so disturbing.
I love that the synopsis ends with Mary's definitely going to find herself.
You're like, oh no, do we want her to?
uh there's so many layers to this story, and I know people talk about it, and I mean Nat Cassidy himself talks about it being kind of an homage to Carrie, like an older Carrie who's another tragic
Yes.
lost girl.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. But kind of one of those where you're like, go girl, You're like, yes, get that revenge. I want it for you.
It's that Lucille Bluth, like, good for her.
For her, exactly.
And this has elements of that. um But she was just such a fascinating character in how odd she was and how masterfully this story is told. I read it, and then prior to this episode, I borrowed the audiobook from the library, and just I was like, catching on to how early seeds are planted and like certain things are told that like with context now have a totally different meaning, and I'm like, this is such good storytelling, like from the start. See the way
Yeah.
everything's moving.
Yeah. And she was one too that was like a little bit unlikable at times, right?
Yeah.
And you kind of early on you don't really know why. You don't know the full story behind some of these thoughts she's having and everything.
Yeah.
So you're just kind of along for the ride. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
she's
loved
really
it.
odd. She has these little like figurines that she talks to.
Her little they're not precious moments, but they're
But
like that kind of thing. Yeah.
yeah.
So creepy, which so creepy. Like just that alone.
Yeah.
Hmm.
She's just an interesting character. And because you're in her POV, like I said, I love unreliable weird girl POV. You are like rooting for her, but you're also like, I don't know, like you are kind of weird and I get maybe why you're getting this response from people at the same time.
They're not being unreasonable.
But I'm putting this in the freezer just because I was reading this and it was hinted at that a certain something was going to happen. And then when it happened, I was like, oh no, I didn't think we were going to see it. Like it
Yeah.
was going to happen on the
I
page.
know exactly what you're talking about. And
Yes.
I actually I was listening to the book and I stopped listening to it for a time to like mentally prepare myself for what might be coming.
Hmm.
And then I think I turned the speed up to like 2.5 or something. I was like, go, just go. Let's get through it.
Like maybe if we blaze past this. But I mean, right from the top, it opens with like the corpses in the bathtubs with like bags on their head.
They were so
Like,
creepy. Yes.
yeah,
That
like we
visual.
know where we're going.
Yeah, agreed. So scary.
So I loved that. That is A Mary, An Awakening of Terror by Nat Cassidy.
That was a really good one. My next pick is A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay.
Ooh,
So good.
yeah.
Um, this one is just one that is stuck in my brain. Like I think about it, once a month or something. I just like this story has stuck with me. And it's about a family that's kind of torn apart when the 14-year-old daughter, Marjorie, begins to display signs of schizophrenia. And doctors are unable to kind of help her. And then the family turns to a local Catholic priest for help, which already I'm like, oh no, here we go.
Mhm.
We're using an exorcism to handle a mental health issue. This is not going to be good. Um, so this Catholic priest, Father Wanderley, suggests an exorcism because he believes she's the victim of a demonic possession. And he also contacts a production company that wants to document this whole thing. So, kind of what we were talking about earlier, sort of like capitalizing on your trauma.
Yeah.
But this family, the father, has been out of work for more than a year. They have all these medical bills. And so they agreed, and you can't blame them. They agreed to be filmed. They're like, okay, at least we're going to be able to pay some of our bills by being on this show, which is called The Possession,
Yeah.
and it becomes like a hit reality TV show, which is so disturbing, but I can absolutely see it happening
Yeah.
in real life. um, and then the events in the household and the show become really tragic. They end in tragedy, and it becomes kind of this urban legend. And the book itself follows the younger sister, Mary. She's kind of recounting what happened
Hmm.
during this time of her life. And so I think there's also an insane twist at the end, which I loved. But there's kind of two lost girls in this. There's Marjorie, who is lost to mental health issues and this whole like exorcism thing and being filmed, all this stuff. She is lost, but also the little sister is lost. She's like, there's nothing she can do for her older sister. She's just kind of watching all this happen and she has no power to stop it. So, yeah, it's very disturbing. And I felt bad for both those little girls.
Yeah.
um,
Creepy.
and I would rate this there it's more disturbing to me like philosophically, I guess, but I would still put it fridge. There were a few scenes that were a little dicey. So, I'm going to put it in the fridge.
And I also love that it's canon within the Paul Tremblay universe. Like in the Pallbearers Club, they mention, they're like, "Did you ever watch that show, The Possession?" I'm like, I know what they're talking about.
That's like pretty impressive too when you get your own canon. That's like a
Hmm.
next level of authorship, I think.
I love that. I love when authors work within their own like universe.
Me too. I love it. And then as the reader, you feel like you're in on it,
Yeah,
You're like, "Oh, I get it." Yeah.
that was for me. Thanks.
Yeah, that was like an inside joke. Some of you guys might not understand it, but I did.
My final pick, I am going with Sadie by Courtney Summers. I was talking to you earlier. This was a pick. I had like swapped like four different books out, but I was like, no, like this just fits. Sadie as a character fits the theme of Lost Girl, I think, perfectly because she hasn't had an easy life. She's grown up on her own. She was raising her little sister, Maddie, in this isolated small town, trying to be like a good older sister and provider, like keep their heads above water. And then her sister is murdered. There's a botched police investigation, but she is pretty certain she knows who did it. And she is determined to bring her sister's killer to justice. And she, at the beginning of the story, you just see her set out on this mission with that singular objective. And alongside her narrative, and this was, I think, the first novel I ever read that incorporated this. There's a true crime podcast about her and her story. And if you're listening to the audiobook, it is like a different narrator, different, like it has the production of a true crime podcast.
I love that. As a true crime, as also a true crime fan, give me all the true crime plus horror crossovers. I want it. Yeah.
So you just see like both of these stories like coming closer and closer together. And then you see, ah, it was a, I listened to this on audio and I just remember it being like on the edge of my seat, like, oh my.
All right. I'm going to confess I haven't. Now I'm going to have to listen to this one on audio. I think audio, it sounds like, is the way to go.
It definitely
I'm
is.
going to get it.
I recommend it. Um, I think the publisher around the time the book came out released like the true crime chapters as a podcast you could download.
That's cool. I love that.
But yeah, Sadie was just she just fits that character. And you are rooting for her as she is going to take on her sister's killer. Like every obstacle she encounters until she gets there. Until she meets the final boss.
The final boss, the killer themselves.
Yeah. I would put this in room temperature. I mean, I think this is technically like a young adult thriller, if I'm remembering correctly. Like I said, still had me on the edge of my seat. I was absolutely. This is a story like I still think about, and an author I went back and read other stuff by her, and will continue to read her stuff. Like this was the book that made me fall in love with Courtney Summers.
Well, I'm in. You convinced me.
That's always good. Woo. So that is Sadie by Courtney Summers.
Okay, my last pick is The Rust Maidens by Gwendolyn Case. And I just recently read this. I've read a lot of Gwendolyn Case stuff and I love everything she does. But I just read this one and it might have climbed to the top of the list for me of her work. It takes place in Cleveland in the 80s, and the main character, Phoebe, and her best friend have just graduated high school. And it should be a time for them of like just thinking about the future, and the world is wide open to them, right? The world is their oyster. But instead of that, they really are kind of almost at a dead end. Phoebe is kind of supposed to be getting out, but their town is just like there's abandoned factories. The river is literally on fire. It's just a mess of a place to be. And then what starts happening in their neighborhood is that girls start changing. They're their bodies are changing. They're leaving sort of rusty footprints of water on the sidewalks. And then their bodies start to kind of wither and corrode. Their fingernails turn into broken glass, and their bones start to kind of expose beneath their skin like corroded metal. And nobody knows what is causing this transformation in this group of girls that they're calling the Rust Maidens. But it brings in tourists who want to see these girls and gawk at them. It brings in government types that want to study the girls and see what's happening. And the most disturbing part, I think, is like the way the community reacts. So the community basically is like, what did you do to make this happen to yourself? This is clearly your fault. You did something. And also, by doing this, you're making things bad for us. So, how dare you
Yeah.
make our lives harder? So, yeah, it just really hit me because it's such a metaphor for kind of blaming women and girls for things that are out of their control and just putting these really unreasonable expectations on them. So, I just think Gwendolyn Kais, kind of masterfully incorporated that whole idea into this. And the actual things that happen to the girls are just riveting. Like watching their transformation, I thought was very cool. Like they're sort of monsters, but sort of beautiful.
Mhm.
Um, and I just kind of loved them. So yeah, I like that one a lot.
I loved this book.
It was so good. It's another one I'm thinking about after reading it.
Yeah. I read it a few years ago, but I think it's also such a good sister novel to her latest, The Haunting in Velkwood.
Which I have, but I haven't read yet. And I'm
Oh,
really,
they make a good pair.
oh, great. I almost tried to speed read that one for this episode because I could tell by the description it would probably fit.
Yeah, someone who's like traumatized, like stagnant.
Yep. The only girls to survive the haunting of the neighborhood
Yeah.
kind of a thing. So, yeah, I'm definitely going to read that soon. But as far as the Rust Maidens, I would probably put it in the fridge. It wasn't necessarily gory, although there was some body horror kind of elements to it. But it was certainly philosophically disturbing for me.
Yeah.
So,
It's a good one. And then I know both of us had honorable mentions because there
yes.
was just honestly too many things. Um I was thinking too of Only She Came Back by Margot Harrison, which is another YA thriller about a girl who's like, living in her hometown, like post high school, um, who's really obsessed with true crime when like a girl she went to high school with and like didn't know because she was popular. She becomes like internet famous, dating this like survivalist YouTuber, and then he's missing and she just kind of like stumbles out of the desert and is like just living in the town while they're looking into her case, and she just becomes so intrigued and like maneuvers her way into like befriending her, into like
Mm.
getting in her circle, and just becomes like obsessed with the case and trying to
Oh,
find out what happened.
okay. I'm gonna have to check that one out. That sounds good. I also, like you said, we came up with too long of lists, so I have several too. The first one is Our Own Unique Affliction by Scott Moses. First off, I love a vampire story. Give me all of them. I love it, every interpretation. And this one was so like kind of poignant and dark.
Yeah.
I love a sister story. There are sisters who are vampires and each in their own way trying to kind of figure out how to survive like immortality essentially, but addressing it in, you know, not necessarily healthy ways. Which I can see, right? It seems
Yeah.
realistic to me of like, man, what a kind of blessing and curse. And how do you come to terms with that mentally? And what does it make you do to the people you care about? So, yeah, I really liked Our Own Unique Affliction by Scott Moses. Great take on a vampire story.
Yeah. Did like that one too. Um, I was also telling you earlier, like I was thinking The Return by Rachel Harrison because it is like one literally about a lost girl in a friend group
Yep.
who goes missing for I think it's like 2 years, and she just comes back and acts like nothing happened and has no memory of what happened. But what's interesting about it is we're told this story through Elise, who was in denial and never wanted to believe that anything had happened to her friend. Like the rest of the friend group was pushing for like having a funeral, getting closure, kind of moving on with your life, and Elise would not. Like she did not want to admit or come to terms with the fact that something had happened to her friend. And not to spoil anything, but when her friend comes back, she is different, to say the
Mm-hmm.
least. They go on a girls' trip to like a quirky themed hotel, and things start happening. And Julie is a little off.
Yes, very much so. Also, I want to visit the hotel in that. It seems so weird.
Yeah. Yeah, Elise was also such an interesting character. I know people are have mixed feelings about her, which is my favorite. Like I said, I love like
Yeah,
weird, unlikable, like flawed logic
yeah. She does some
characters.
serious. I mean, I know what you're talking about. She has done some things that you're like, judgment, listen, bad choices.
I'm like,
But
like, what are you doing? Stop doing that thing. Like you're watching her describe what she's doing. You're like, no,
oh
please don't do that.
my God.
And I know exactly what you're talking about.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good one. I love the return. Okay, I also had honorable mention that actually I think you talked about on the podcast a couple weeks ago is The Queen of the Cicadas by Bea
Yeah.
Castro because um, you know they have the dual plot lines with the modern day woman and the woman who died that was a farm worker and was murdered. So there's kind of two lost girl plots. One obviously has been finished, like she died, but she also in death kind of like called on this Aztec goddess to avenge her, essentially.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, I liked how the dual plot lines are kind of two girls battling their own things and trying to find the best way to get through life, essentially. And maybe there's a little revenge in there too, which I always love. So that's a great one.
I just finished reading The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monica Kim, which is coming out in June. But we're following a girl, well, we're following a young woman who, lives at home with her mother and sister, and their father has just left. And her mother starts dating just like this awful guy who sexualizes and objectifies Asian women, and like everything about him is just so gross. But this protagonist is going through it, but she becomes obsessed with the idea of eyeballs and just looking at people's eyeballs and obsessing and imagining what they would taste like.
Ooh,
And it just like overtakes her life.
wow. That's a I've been seeing that one around and I've seen the cover, which is very striking.
Yeah.
So I definitely want to check it out. And now, like, I don't actually want to eat eyeballs, but I am thinking about how, like, the texture, how it would be. That'd be so weird.
You ever eaten like a fish eyeball, like when they serve like a fish head?
No, I've only
Oh.
eaten like tiny little caviars and things, you know, the little
Mhm.
fish eggs. I've eaten fish eggs, but I've never eaten a fish eyeball. Have you eaten a fish eyeball?
No, but that's how it starts,
Okay.
you know.
You're like, try it.
And then
You might,
maybe you
it
will
might be a
develop,
gateway to actual human eyeballs.
it'll open a door.
It's kind of like eating human flesh and cannibalism. Don't start because you don't want to accidentally find out it's delicious, you know?
Yeah.
I also had an honorable mention of The Sacred Lives of Minnow Bly, which is a young adult book. And it's one of those where I'm like, it's so disturbing. I don't even know how it's young adult. But it's about Minnow who escapes a cult. And this happens super early on. You know this about her, but it's a hardcore cult. And she actually had her hands chopped off. So she has no hands.
Okay.
Yeah. And she's basically in juvie. It opens with her in juvie. And you kind of start to learn about what she went through in this cult. But it's intense. Um, if you like cult stories, it's good, but it's definitely brutal, very
Yeah.
brutal, which is why I'm like, I sort of can't believe it's young adult, but it's really good.
Hmm. I've seen that one around and I've definitely heard people talk about it. I don't think I knew what it was about though.
Yeah, it's disturbing.
What I'm currently reading, and I feel like as a premise it works, but obviously since I'm in the middle of it, I don't know where it goes. But it's called A Misfortune of Lake Monsters by Nicole Wolverton. And this is about a girl named Lemon who lives in this small town that's known for kind of their local cryptid, which is a sea monster, and it drives a lot of tourism. And her family does like boat tours where people try to see the sea monster. And Lemon, we find out, can't really go to college because her new job is to impersonate this sea monster. Like when the novel opens, like she is under the water in her gear and, has to like do her little thing and appear. And then, we go to the school and we see like how much of the lifeblood of this town is the existence of this monster. And that's like all people talk about and they're obsessed. So it's kind of like she's absolutely stuck here. Like all her friends are getting ready to go to college. And essentially, the livelihood of this town depends on her giving up her dreams to take up this mantle, and like no one can know, so it's also a secret she has to keep and just kind like silently deal with this fate. um but then an actual monster appears,
Okay, great.
so
I love this twist.
we're like, wait, what?
Oh, okay. I've seen
And
this
that's where I am in the story, so I don't know what happens
okay.
from here.
Okay. Well, I'm intrigued. I've seen this one around
Yeah,
and like making appearances on my social media, so I'm definitely going to put that one on my list. I
but
had an honorable mention of my current read as well that I am also not finished with. I'm only about halfway through, and it's called I Can See Your Lies by Izzy Lee.
oh
So Izzy Lee is actually a filmmaker, and I first became familiar with her because she had a short film at StokerCon one year. You know how they have the little short film festival?
yeah,
She had a short film, and then now she has released this. It's a novella, so it's pretty short. But it's about this woman who is kind of stuck in a bad marriage and kind of repeating the bad behaviors and cycles that go along with that. And also kind of looking into the past of her mother's disappearance. So her mother was a Hollywood starlet that disappeared and no one knows what happened to her, and she ends up getting a hold of this like secret diary. And also there's some weird things happening, like she's getting like messages and things and she's not sure from whom, but clearly someone knows something. So she's on this journey to sort of figure out her own life and like what is going on with her own relationship, and also solve the mystery of what happened to her mother. So far I really like it. It's definitely got some of the true crime elements,
yeah.
you know, of a little sleuthing, and it's kind of surreal as well. So yeah, I'm liking it so far. I think it fits, but we will see how it ends.
Should we talk some chilling obsessions?
Yes. Um my chilling obsession lately is cicadas.
Interesting, okay.
So I'm not particularly scared of bugs or insects, but I really don't like ones with crunchy shells. Like
That
the
makes
hard
sense to me.
ones just creep
Yeah.
me out like so much. And I've been going down these rabbit holes of cicada research because it's like all my internet browsers are cicada related right now. And because some people may already know this, it is going to be a giant year of cicadas that hasn't happened in over 200 years because cicadas, I don't think the word is hibernate, but they go underground. They develop underground and
Yeah.
they emerge every number of years. And there are two broods coming out this year, a 17-year brood and a 13-year brood that normally don't come out at the same time, but they are. So we are going to have like billions of cicadas coming out at the same time. And there's going to be a crossover in like kind of the eastern United States. where these two broods are going to come out at the same time, and it is going to be cicada madness. There's going to be so many cicadas. I'm sure it'll be very loud because they like scream. Um, and here, okay, they first of all they have red eyes. I don't know if you knew that about cicadas. So creepy, like little red eyeballs, very creepy, emerging from the ground. And there is this zombie cicada as well. So there's this.
What?
I know. There's this fungus. You know that fungus that infects ants and makes them crawl to the
No,
top of trees to spread the
don't
fungus?
tell me this.
I'm sorry, you have to know it. You
I asked,
I
so
know
tell
it,
me,
and
tell me.
now I have to tell you. So it's a okay, it's even worse. It's sexually transmitted. So it's a hypersexualized zombie cicada
Oh God.
that like spreads this fungus by doing it with all the other cicadas, and it looks totally gross. I don't Google pictures of it.
There's a screenwriter at Sci-Fi right now, like jotting this down for
Hypersexualized.
hypersexual zombie cicada
Is it?
coming this fall.
I mean, it's gold, honestly. And okay, one more thing I'm just going to add on. With cicadas come cicada killer wasps.
No.
They're these giant wasps that are so big that they can basically eat a 3-inch long cicada. So it's going to be madness. And that is my chilling obsession.
I love Okay. My chilling obsession is I watched 2 movies this week. I went on a Tubi deep dive, and I watched one I had kind of high hopes for. It was a little bit of a letdown, but it was called Satan's Cheerleaders from
Oh,
1977. You've seen this?
no, but I love the title. It's making me want to see it.
This is the cover art for it.
That's perfect.
Let me read you the synopsis for this. The janitor at a local high school is actually the scout for a coven of Satanists on the lookout for a virgin to sacrifice. One day, he kidnaps the cheerleading squad to use for their rituals. However, unbeknownst to the devil worshippers, one of the cheerleaders is actually a witch and has plans of her own for the Satanists.
Oh, well, I like that little twist. I wasn't expecting the witch
Yeah,
to make an appearance.
it is fun. It's very 70s, and the dialogue just sounds like a porn dialogue. Like it just seems like the wildest, like weirdest things. Who wrote this? But then I also watched a 1981 TV movie, Dark Night of the Scarecrow.
Ooh, that sounds familiar.
It was on one of the seasons of The Last Drive-In. Joe Bob
Okay,
showed it.
that might be where I've seen it. Okay.
I had a good time with it. This is about Baba, an intellectually disabled man who is falsely accused of attacking a young girl. And there's a mob of people coming after him, and he hides disguised as a scarecrow, but he is hunted down and shot by the vigilantes. And then it comes out that the girl was fine, like she had actually been attacked by a dog, and everyone assumed that it was Bubba who had hurt her. And then all the vigilante men are tried and acquitted because it's like small town
Mhm.
justice. And the men find themselves being stalked one by one. And that part
Love
is fun to watch, like the justice being served. Also, I love that the villain in this, like the head of this crew of vigilantes, is a megalomaniac mailman
it.
who's like, it's my duty. I have to pursue justice.
I have to make sure people get their mail on time and also just pursue justice for our
Yeah.
town.
Oh, he is awful. He is awful for so many reasons. But for a TV movie, I will say this was pretty good.
Plus, it sounds like a slasher, which
Yeah,
I love a good classic slasher. Yeah.
I did like
I
it.
do think I saw that, although I don't remember it well.
Yeah. So I rated this one a bit higher than Satan's Cheerleaders. I think
Still, they both sound fun.
they are fun.
I like a trashy horror movie sometimes, you know? They don't always
Yeah.
have to be good, but they just
Yeah.
need to be entertaining.
And you know what? It wasn't a bad day to spend. to spend some time. So those were my two recent watches.
I love it.
Right. Well, the second tradition we have on the show is to ask guests for a final girl song.
I'm very excited for this.
Yeah.
I agonized over it. It probably would change every week. But currently, my final girl song is This Is How Villains Are Made by Madeline Duke. I've been listening to that song on repeat for like 2 months. And I love it because it's kind of about how some things just turn you into something else.
Yeah.
This is how villains are made. I don't even care whose side I'm on. I'm going to go out and like slit some throats. you know?
Yeah.
So I feel like that's kind of maybe how I would be as a final girl. Like you sort of have to turn into the bad thing. You have to become a killer to defeat the monster.
Yeah.
So that's why I chose that.
I love that. And I mean, those are the final girl vibes. We see her like gearing up. She's like making her makeshift weapons or grabbing whatever,
Mm-hmm.
getting ready to go face to face.
That's right. Machete in hand,
Yeah. I love it. Okay. Well, I will definitely be adding that to the playlist.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on here and talking to me about Lost Girls and horror.
My pleasure. This was so much fun.
It was. All right. Where can people find you online?
My website is angelasylvaine.com, and I'm on pretty much all the socials. Twitter, I will always call it that. Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, TikTok, all the things. You can just find me under Angela Sylvaine. And I'm also very friendly, so feel
Cheerful
free to
goth. I've heard you
Yes,
described as.
cheerful goth. I'm very perky and friendly, and also dark and disturbing. But say hi. I love
Yeah.
it.
I love it. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Books in the Freezer is a bi-weekly podcast. We post episodes every other Tuesday. You can find us on TikTok, Threads, and Instagram at Books in the Freezer, or send us an email at booksinthefreezer@gmail.com. Show notes for this episode and all previous episodes can be found at booksinthefreezer.com, where you will find a list of the books and movies mentioned in this episode, as well as some affiliate links, places to get merch, and a link to our Patreon if you are looking for a way to support the podcast. And also, Books in the Freezer is an independent podcast. It is fully listener supported, and in these days of algorithms, engagement is huge. So if you could do me a favor and take some time and leave a review on a site like Apple Podcasts or Spotify, even if that's not primarily where you listen to the podcast, that would still do a lot in terms of engagement. On Spotify, you don't even have to leave a review. I think once you've listened to at least one episode, you can just leave a star rating. And if you could leave a few words and a star rating on Apple Podcasts, that would be incredible. Listen, would I prefer a 5-star review? Of course I would. But you do you. If you could just leave some stars and some nice words, I will read them on the next episode of the podcast that I record. And I know so many of you have already done that. And to you, I say thank you so much. Sending a big kiss. I have been your host, Stephanie Gagne. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next time on Books in the Freezer.